Hey friends, it's Robin. Welcome back to my channel. So today we are doing another recent reads video. Today I have 10 books to talk about. I don't have almost any of these in a physical format. I went on a huge KU reading spree. They were either ARCs or Kindle books. So I'm just gonna get right into it. So the first book is Voyeur by Fiona Cole. I gave this 5 stars. I loved this book. This is one of those books that has been sitting on my TBR forever. I think I had this on my Kindle for like 2 years and I finally decided to pick it up and I am so glad I picked it up. I adore this couple. This is a student-teacher romance, but in this, they don't know that there's a student teacher. So she is 19, about to turn 20, and I think he's 29. The heroine really needs money because she currently can't afford college. Her best friend hooks her up with this job at this exclusive sex club, and on one of her first nights there, the hero sees her and they have this sort of like instant attraction and he pays for a scene with her. The next day, he discovers that she is a student in his class. Not only is she a student in his class, but she is a new employee of his. She has multiple jobs and one of them is assisting his department. And so not only are they in class together, but she is also helping him like file papers and things like that. They had such good chemistry. Student teacher is a really hard dynamic to get correct because there is such a power imbalance, but Fiona Cole did such a good job of kind of like evening it out. It worked out really well. I loved the depiction of assault in here, major trigger warnings for sexual assault in the past. But yeah, it was so well done. I loved them so much, and I'm glad I finally picked this series up. I am completely obsessed with it. I have already continued on. In fact, the next book that I read was Lovers by Fiona Cole, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. This book was a wild journey and it is not going to work for everyone. In this, we are following one of our heroes is a man that we met in book 1. He has always been carrying a torch for his college best friend. So when they were in college, they were really close and they had this one night together. After that, his best friend started pulling away and they never really were the same again. And they kind of grew apart after college. Now our hero is opening up a bar that is kind of tied to Voyeur. His best friend from college is working with like a marketing team. He's like one of the co-owners or something like that. Him and his fiance end up teaming up with our hero to work on the marketing for this new bar. It goes from an MF romance between the best friend and his fiance to an MMF romance because they enter into a throuple, and it ends as an MM romance. And so there's a journey through here. I know that cheating is not for everyone, but there is cheating in this book. And I honestly, I loved it. I loved it. I do not have a problem with cheating in books. And before anyone like comes for me, I'm not condoning cheating, but I can read about it in a book the same way that other readers can read about murder in a book and not want to murder people. I loved these. I loved these couples. And the heroine in here does get her own AGA. I want to say in book 4, so I'm really excited for that because I really liked her as well. After that, I read Love in English by Karina Halle, and Karina Halle is an author that I had kind of written off. I've read a couple of books from her that I mediocrely liked, and I read a couple that I really didn't like. And so I'm trying to see if this is an author I should stop picking up books from, or if I've just been picking up the wrong books from them. And I gave this one 4 stars. I actually really liked this. This is an older book. The premise of this was just so cool. In this, our heroine is in college and she decides that she is going to spend her summer in Spain, and she's part of this program that is helping people learn to speak conversational English. So everyone in this program already knows English to some extent, but they are trying to be better conversationally for most of them for their jobs. So she goes to this program and really her only task is to live in this little area and talk to people. and they have different things that they're supposed to do. Sometimes it's just having a conversation. Sometimes it's like role playing a meeting or a phone call or something like that. And this was so good. Again, there's cheating in this book, but it was so good. This book was kind of broken up into 3 parts. So the first part of it is all at this summer program. The second part is our couple apart, and then the third part is them together and working out their stuff. I loved it so much. The stakes felt high, the tension was so good, their romance was so good. I listened to this on audio and the audiobook was fantastic. I loved it. There is a sequel called Love in Spanish that is from the hero's perspective. I'm kind of interested in picking that one up. From what I understand, it does have some overlap, but a lot of it is just totally separate things that we didn't know about from the hero's point of view. So I am interested in that. I don't know if I'll pick it up, but I really, really liked this. 4 stars to this. Really, really good. After that, I read Below Zero by Ali Hazelwood. This is the 3rd and final book in her STEMinist audio series, and this was my favorite of the entire series. I gave this 5 stars. I had a feeling this was going to be my favorite just because of the synopsis. So in this, we are following an aerospace engineer. She is stuck in Norway during a snowstorm, and no one is going to come and save her except for her sworn enemy. I love enemies to lovers, but this wasn't even quite enemies to lovers. It had so many other layers in it. So we open up this book by our hero and our heroine have this kind of random meeting because she wants to interview somebody from NASA for a class of hers. And he is kind of this NASA prodigy because he started working there at 17 or something like that. And so they have this really intense meeting, and he takes her back to his lab and she's totally geeking out, and they do some coding together. For those of you that don't know, I am a programmer, so I loved all of the programming jokes. It was so cute. They're working on this troubleshooting his program, and they end up having this really steamy encounter. He wants to take her out to dinner and she has a strict no dating rule. And so they kind of go their separate ways and they don't see each other again until our heroine, a couple years later, gets her first job at NASA. She gets there, and by this point, he has kind of worked his way up, and now he is a boss, a manager. They reconnect and they have this really cute moment, and there is some misunderstanding that happens, and she thinks that he is undermining her. It's not necessarily miscommunication. She's lied to, essentially. So she thinks that he's undermining her, and she decides that she wants nothing to do with him. And she goes on this expedition, and she ends up getting trapped. The only person that is willing to try and save her is the hero. There's caretaking in here. There's a second chance romance. It's all the things that I love. It was so good. I loved these guys so much. Our hero is my favorite type of hero. He's this big cinnamon roll, and he doesn't understand why this heroine would want him. And I loved him so, so much. It was great. I loved it. It's also our heroine is super grumpy and anti-love, and I loved this one. 5 stars. After that, I read a couple of, I don't want to say duds, but they weren't super great. I read Arson by Mia Asher. This is, if anyone is sensing a theme here, this is another cheating romance. Our heroine is married and her husband is amazing. I gave this 3 stars, just so you know. I didn't hate it, but I had a hard time with this one because when there is a cheating romance, I need to understand where it's coming from. And in this one, the husband is amazing. He worships the ground that she walks on. They're having a hard time getting pregnant, so trigger warnings for infertility and miscarriage in here. And because of that, she's kind of separating herself from him. He is trying to give her space, he's trying to help her out, and she wants nothing to do with him. She essentially associates her husband with all of the negativity of them losing their children, and because of that, she pulls away and she starts cheating on him. And as much as I understood, just so much disagreed. And On top of that, the guy that she cheats with, I didn't like him at all. I didn't understand why, like what their connection was. I could never pinpoint like why they had an attraction to each other. It was really strange to me. I didn't particularly love it. I gave this one 3 stars. I tried another book from this author and I DNF'd it in the second chapter. So I think this is just not an author for me. So 3 stars, not my favorite. After that, I read The Affair by Gianna Darling. And Gianna Darling is an author that I have wanted to give a read for quite a while. However, I don't like motorcycle romances. And so I didn't want to give her like the Fallen Men series. I think that's the one that Jess from Peace Love Books and Tori from A Novel Life are reading. But I don't like motorcycle romances. So I didn't want to read that one. And I decided to pick this one up and I ended up giving this like 3.5 stars. One of my big holdups in this book was actually I didn't know that this was a series and that's on me. But I got to the end of the book and I was like, wait, what? Like there's no, you're just like left. It's like the book just stops. Like I swear it felt like it stopped mid-sentence. It was just like they're on the beach and then the book was over. And I was like, wait, well, we didn't even get to a good stopping point. And so I didn't love that. But overall, this was just okay. This is following our heroine. She's been living in Paris, and for some reason that is not disclosed, she needs to leave Paris and she's moving back home with her family, but she's kind of estranged from her family, and she is taking 1 week in Mexico as like a reset before going back to her family. While she is there on her first night, she meets this guy, and he wants to have a 1 week long affair. He is in a committed relationship, and they agree to have like 1 week together. However, as the week goes on, they realize that they really like each other and their feelings become stronger. It's either 2 or 3 books, I can't remember. Part of me does want to continue on and read the rest of it, but I also know where it's going. And so I haven't decided if I want to read the rest. The writing honestly wasn't my favorite. I have now read this and a short story from Gianna Darling, and I didn't particularly love the writing in either. So I'm not sure if this author is for me. I know people love her MC romances. MC romances just aren't for me, so I don't know. I'm up in the air about this one, but I gave it like 3.5 stars. After that, I read I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. I am so sorry for calling it Sarah Wheeler for so long. It is Shara. I listened to the audiobook for this one and I was like, oh my god, I've been saying the name wrong this whole time. But I gave this 4.5 stars. This was so good. I adore Casey McQuiston. The way that they write romances is just so good. And I never read YA, specifically YA romances. They usually do not work for me. I want a certain maturity and like steam level to my romances the majority of time. But this was so good. This had so many elements that I loved in it. It had really adorable like character arcs. It had a great friendship group. It had a mystery element. It had romance elements. It was just, this takes place in like the Bible Belt of Alabama, and it takes place at a really religious school. Shara is kind of like the golden child. Her father is the principal of their private school, and everyone adores her. Our other heroine is Chloe, and she is kind of on track to become the valedictorian, but she is from LA and she has 2 moms, and she is the outcast at school. She's seen as like the bad girl because she's queer, and so she is always kind of like pushing the limits. She's, you know, not following the dress code. She's talking out of line, things like that. And everyone puts up with her because she is so intelligent. We also have one of our heroes is Shara's boyfriend. He is the quarterback of the football team. He's Black. And throughout this, he is starting to question his gender and sexuality. And we also have a second hero, and he is like the bad boy of the school. He skips class. He, you know, has the whole bad boy image. He lives next door to Shara, and he's always kind of been like the boy next door to her. He used to be best friends with the other hero, but they had this big breakup. Shara kissed all 3 of them the day before she suddenly disappeared. And now she's leaving them these little notes, and they need to try and figure out the riddles to find where Shara went and why she kissed them. The mystery elements were so cute. I loved all of the relationships across this book. It was everything I wanted. Casey McQuiston's writing is so fantastic. The audiobook for this was also really, really well done. So if you are on the hunt for a really fun audiobook, I highly recommend this one. After that, I read Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, and this was my first Abby Jimenez book, and I was so nervous going into this book because so many people were telling me that her books were absolutely heartbreaking, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. And I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. This was so, so good. This was nearly a perfect book for me. I did just like tear up at one point in here. It hurt so much, but it wasn't like heartbreaking sad. It was more just like I felt very attached to these characters. And when they were like going through it, I was like, I was heartbroken. But this is following our heroine who comes from this really prestigious, wealthy family in Minnesota. Her entire family have been surgeons. They're like the superstars of their hospital. Like half the hospital is named after them. And she is kind of like the disappointment in the family because she only became an ER doctor. But she loves what she does, and she has no desire to be the spokesperson for their family. But right at the beginning of the book, her brother like lets her know that he is not coming back to Minnesota, and he is essentially like cutting himself off from the family because he is going to stay in Cambodia, and he married a woman that his parents do not approve of. And so he's kind of cut off, and she is suddenly like the heir to their like dynasty, and she doesn't want it. But she meets this guy in this really, really small town, and he is a carpenter, and he runs this tiny little bed and breakfast, and the two of them have this like one intense night together. They click so perfectly. They kind of keep seeing each other, and the whole time they have no idea how they're gonna make this work. The hero is like ready to give up everything for the heroine, but she knows that like letting him into her life will be detrimental to him because her family is honestly cruel. Like they're terrible people. They're so mean. They're so mean to her. They see everyone else as being just like beneath them. And so she doesn't want to bring him into her circle because she doesn't want to do that to him. But she also feels such responsibility for her family's history and like carrying on that line. And she doesn't want to give up all of the good that she can do at this hospital with her name, but she also doesn't want to give up the guy. And so hence Part of Your World, they kind of come from these two separate worlds, and they're trying to figure out how to make it work. One of the things that I loved so much about this romance is that this is one of those romances where the whole time you're like, okay, I know that there's a happily ever after, but like, how are we possibly going to get there? There were so many obstacles in their way, and the whole time I was like, how could you ever make this work? And so like the journey to get to that happily ever after was so, so good. And there were times that where I was like, oh my God, do they not end up together? Like there was a moment at like the 3/4 mark where I was like, if this doesn't have an HEA, I am going to riot. Like I was really nervous, but it does have an HEA. And this was just, it was so good. It was really well written. The characters were so good. There is this really, really slight magical element. I knew that going in, but I was still surprised by it. It's so subtle that like I would never classify this as like fantasy or anything. There is just this really, really subtle magical element to it, and I loved it. The next book that I read is the one book that I own physically, and that is The Dragon's Bride by Katee Robert. And I gave this 3.5 stars. I actually really enjoyed this. This is her first monster romance. And this, we got like a little clip of this right at the end of Queen. And so this is set in the same world. And in this, we are following, our heroine is one of 5 women that makes a deal with a demon. And they go to this other realm, and they are essentially going to be auctioned off to the other creatures, like make up the territory. So each of the leaders of their territories are there, and they are going to take one of the women. Our heroine in this one is Briar Rose, and she is coming from a very, very abusive marriage. And so she made this deal in order to get out of her situation. She knows that she can't go back to the real world because there is nothing left for her there. And so she has no idea what she's going to do after this, but she agrees to give up 7 years, and she is given to this dragon man, and his name is Soul. They have such a cute romance. She is obviously very terrified of him at first, but they have to get married because in his culture, she is better protected by them getting married. The two of them are just kind of trying to navigate their differences and get to know each other. This is still super steamy, like most of Katie Roberts' books, but I thought this had better romantic development in it. You actually got to see them like have conversations and get to know each other and like work through some of the things that are obviously going to make their relationship difficult. I really, really appreciated that. And I talked about this in a different video, but one of my holdups with Katie Robert writing non-contemporary stories is that her world building is really lacking. This was the case in the Bloodline Vampire series. This is the case in like the Desperate Measures series. This is the case in whatever the Neon Gods series is, where I don't like totally understand the world. And it was really evident in here because this is the first one that is like truly fantastical. And so there were like discussions about how the heroines, like why they were brought here and how they're going to help save the kingdom. And I just don't understand. And it was all really, really vague. And like, I don't know if I missed something. I don't know if you're not supposed to understand quite yet. But it was brought up over and over again about how the bargainer demon did this for a reason to save the kingdom. And I just can't figure out how can't figure out how it's going to help. I think it would have been better if it wasn't in here at all, because then I would have never even thought about it, but it was brought up and not really well explained. And so it felt like this really strange, she wanted to put in world building, but there wasn't a lot of it. And like, I don't want a ton of world building in a story like this, but if you're going to bring it up, you have to make it understandable, and I feel like it just wasn't. And so that kind of like brought it down for me. So I give this 3.5 stars. I did really like this. I liked this so much more than Electric Idol. I was very nervous after hating Electric Idol going into this. I was very nervous, but I did end up enjoying this one. And then the final book that I read for this video was With You Forever by Chloe Liese, and I gave this book 5 stars. This was a really good like reading couple of weeks. I gave a lot of 5 stars. But this was absolutely fantastic. This was the 3rd book that I read by this author. I skipped book 3 because I really wanted to read this one, so I need to go back and read book 3. But in this, we are following one of the Bergman brothers, Axel. Axel lives in Washington, even though the rest of his family has moved to California. And he lives in this tiny little house just off of their like summer property. At the beginning of the book, you learn that their like summer home is kind of in disrepair and it needs a ton of work done. He knows that if he goes to his family and tells them that they're just going to want to sell the house, and he feels very strongly about keeping it. And so the only way that he can afford to pay for all the repairs is to get an inheritance. The only problem is his inheritance is tied to him getting married. And then our heroine is a law student who has just taken a leave of absence because she has ulcerative colitis, and she had a really, really bad flare where she stopped responding to her meds and had to go through a whole bunch of trying new treatments and things like that, and she is very worn down and she needs a break. She is kind of told that she can go stay at the Bergman brothers' summer house up in Washington, and so she goes up there only to discover that she can't stay in the house. Axel lets her stay with him in his home. It is the romance between the two of them. It is a marriage of convenience. It is grumpy sunshine. And I just loved everything about this book. There was something so special about this reading experience. This was my first book that I've read that had ulcerative colitis in it, and it was done so fantastically. Not only did the heroine just have ulcerative colitis, but there were so many little things that like were added in, like tiny little details that you would not know if you didn't have it or know somebody who had it. So Chloe Liese clearly did a lot of research, because there were just so many little things where I was like, your average person just wouldn't know these things. And it was just so impactful. And I felt very seen in this book. It hit extra hard because everything that the heroine went through at the beginning of this book is almost exactly what I just went through, where I had to take a leave of absence from work because I had a massive flare and stopped responding to my medication and had to go through a whole new treatment plan. She's on a different medication than I am, but it was really interesting to see because she's talking about going in for infusions, and like as somebody who has it, I was like, oh, she's on Remicade. Like, so it was just really funny to like have that insight into it, and I loved this. Axel is so stinking sweet. He is neurodiverse, and so he has a hard time reading facial expressions and like essentially reading in between the lines. The way that they accepted each other, worked to understand each other, the way that Axel cared for her was so, so good because he didn't try to fix her when she wanted to complain. He was just there to listen and sit with her, which was amazing. She has a really bad like symptom night because she eats something that she shouldn't, and he just sits with her and lets her be in pain and like just was kind of there for her, and it was just, oh, I loved them so much. And the way that they come back together, like the big conclusion at the end, was the most precious thing I've ever read. I loved them so much. So that is it for the books that I've read recently. I'm gonna do another one of these in a couple of weeks with another certain number of books. I'm trying to do these every like 10 to 15 books so that this video doesn't get too long. Let me know what you've read recently. Let me know if you've read any of these and which ones were your favorites, and I will catch y'all in my next video. Bye!